Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We have a really good show for you today. Tommy couldn't be any better on this one. We have the esteemed Ambassador Chaz Freeman with us back on the show again today. Friend of the show, Chaz. Really great to have you back.
Great to be here.
And for all those who don't know, Ambassador Freeman is a former U.S. ambassador. His former State Department senior official, former Defense Department senior official, has been around some of the most consequential things in American history in recent decades. And with just a joy to have you with us today. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Well, let's just jump right in because we got a lot of things to try to cover in the half hour that we have with you here. Because it's happening right now, first thing I want to talk about is what's going on in Israel in the Hamas war with the Al-Shifa hospital. Just for our viewers' recollection here, this is a map of the war so far, and the light blue area is where the Israeli Defense Forces have so far invaded into the Gaza area, and you see they've almost completely cut off the coast from the Gaza city, and they already had the rest of it cut off there. And right in the middle, the Al-Shifa hospital, and that is a flashpoint for a number of reasons. First, let me show you a brief report this morning on Al Jazeera.
Late hours of last night and early hours of this morning, the Israeli military, under heavy gunfire and tank shells, have raided Shifa Hospital's main buildings. And this morning, we learned that the Israeli military is inside those buildings. They're carrying out this search room by room, corridor by corridor, and lining doctors and medical staff for interrogation. Each one is being interrogated individually. What they are looking for so far, the pretext, as we know, as the Israeli military claims the Shifa hospital is being used by Hamas leadership or Hamas elements to carry out their operations. But so far, we know there aren't any concrete evidence of those claims. The situation is very, very catastrophic right now. There is concern about the 3,000 people inside the hospital. There is no guarantee so far that they will be safe as of this moment.
Now, there are competing narratives on what's going on here. You have, on the one side, the Palestinian view, which says this is just a hospital. It's not being used as a command center for the Hamas terrorist or military wing. And then you have the Israeli side saying, oh, no, to the contrary, it absolutely is. Now, it's not going to be possible for us to say with any accuracy who is right and who is wrong, because both have incentive to lie about whatever may be happening, and those who are telling the truth have an incentive to do that. We can't really tell from the distance here, but what I want you to address first of all is the legality of the issue, because there's the laws of war, which in some ways is kind of gray, because it's as if somebody is using a building, even a protected building, for military purposes, that it makes it a legitimate target. But that's kind of gray, and I just wonder if you could help the viewers understand what's at stake here, really.
Well, Israel has claimed that Hamas is using the building as a shield, using bunkers that are underneath it that apparently Israel itself built when it occupied Gaza. It's produced no evidence, in fact, that Hamas is using those bunkers. Normally, what would have been the acceptable legal procedure would have been to ask the Red Cross or the Red Crescent or another international organization to enter the hospital and do a search to verify that indeed it was being used for military purposes. And in that connection, if such a search had been barred, for example, from entering the basement of the hospital, that would have been circumstantial evidence that suggested that Israel was right in its charges. But no such thing has been done. The hospital is apparently now being brutally searched by Israeli soldiers. In the meantime, of course, it's been cut off from fuel. A lot of infants who are in incubators in the hospital have been taken off the incubators because there's no power for them. 6 or so of them have already died. There are many patients in the hospital. Israel charges that everyone in there is somehow connected with Hamas, but that's part of the general narrative in this conflict, that basically there's no distinction between Hamas and Palestinian civilians, all Palestinian civilians are guilty of what happened on October 7th.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you this. What is the utility in Israel making this a priority target so early in its ground invasion here? Because it seems to me from a military perspective that's because it's got so much emotion tied around it. It's like a lightning rod for both Western support and certainly Arab angst. That seems like it would have been smarter to keep that isolated and then move in other parts of the city that they're going to have to clear anyway. But they are definitely making this a priority. And I wonder if you have any insight as to why that might be.
Well, I think it's part of the Israeli narrative, unfortunately for Israel, as you suggest, is costing Israel tremendously in terms of the moral argument that it has used to justify its massacres, its basic genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. The international reaction to this is horrible. It's a very bad image for Israel. They would have been wise to do what you suggest, but they haven't, and I suspect they haven't because they've convinced themselves of the truth of their own propaganda, and they are trying to demonstrate to the Israeli public, which is determined to exterminate or expel Palestinians from Gaza, that they can do it and that they have a reason to do it. Now, we don't know yet whether they will in fact produce any evidence at all of the use of this hospital for any purpose other than medical purposes.
Yeah, and I suspect that something will be found because, as you mentioned a second ago, I mean, anytime you find a male with a weapon, it seems like they can say, "Oh yeah, see that was a Hamas person." But I mean, everybody has a weapon. Most of the men in the city do, and of course, if they're attacked and they respond, then they're immediately categorized as a Hamas fighter. And I've been in situations like this where anybody who picks up a weapon against you by the attacking force, when I was on the U.S. side, we automatically assumed that as a hostile target and took it out and called it a Taliban or a insurgent in Iraq or whatever. I'm sure the same will be had here, but we'll have to see. But that brings up kind of the main point of what we talked about in this episode today. And in a recent podcast, you had said that we're in a new Zeitenwende kind of period where there's massive change going on. And I think that's being illustrated partly here that the United States seems almost impotent in trying to get Israel not to do some of these things, because good or bad, we're tied to whatever Israel does because of our support and our blanket support. But it seems like in recent days, both President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken have both made public comments that basically we're trying to get Israel to do things, but they're not doing it. Ergo, we're not successful at getting them to influence them or even require things of them, even though we are providing so much support. So I want to know, I want you to explain what you mean by Zeitenwende and how you see that playing out in the region, especially with the Arab regimes in the region.
Well, I think the world reaction to this, these massacres in Gaza, has erased the sympathy for Israel that it had on October 7th, and it's also erased any sympathy for the United States. The United States has taken a position against a ceasefire. For a long time, we were against a humanitarian pause. We now advocate that. Israel seems to have agreed to sporadic humanitarian pauses, but frankly, the world looks at this and they draw the analogy that this is like giving Jews at Auschwitz who are about to go to the gas chamber a chance to take a deep breath and drink some Kool-Aid before they go in. It is just not persuasive. And so I think the Zeitenwende is this, that we already saw with the Ukraine war, the loss of American of support for the United States in the global majority. We had support from NATO countries and Japan and sympathy from South Korea, and that was about it. Now I think we're losing even that. So this is a turning point in our relationship with the world.
And just if I can just kind of put an accent on that point here, we have a compilation of a number of our adversaries and our friends making very similar comments about the loss of American influence.
É preciso que os Estados Unidos pare de incentivar a guerra e comece a falar em paz. É preciso que a União Europeia comece a falar em paz, para a gente poder convencer o Putin e o Zelensky.
美方声称要经营中国，但不寻求冲突。实际上，美方所谓的竞争，就是全方位的遏制、打压，就是你死我活的零和博弈。如果美方不踩刹车，继续沿着错误的道路狂飙下去，再多的护栏也挡不住脱轨翻车，陷入对抗冲突。
We have more of these weapons than NATO countries do. They know that, and they keep telling us to start negotiations on reductions. Well, you know what? They can shove it.
Amerika'nın uçak gemisinin İsrail'de ne işi var? Ne yapmaya geliyor? Ve buraya gelen uçak gemisinin etrafında bütün botlarıyla, uçak gemisindeki uçaklarıyla ne yapacak? Orada bütün artık Gazze'yi etrafını vurarak, indirerek çok ciddi katliamlara.
When we have proposed phone calls, proposed meetings, dialogues, whether that's the Secretary, Chairman Milley, Admiral Aquilino, Dasty Chase, other both civilian and uniformed engagements, we have had repeatedly have had those requests rejected or not answered.
What you see in that clip there is both our friends, our adversaries, and our allies all kind of having a similar comment that they're calling into question American leadership. Now, some may say, okay, yeah, China and Russia, yeah, who cares? They can pound sand because, you know, they're our enemies or our adversaries. So, of course, they're going to. But I argue, and I think that you do as well, that even among our enemies, it is crucial that we have credibility. And as someone who's been, you know, seeped for decades in the diplomatic corps, I wonder if you can explain why it's important for us to have our word mean something both among our friends and our adversaries.
Well, deterrence requires credibility of both the threat that you are posing and the reassurance that you're offering that, you know, the other side does not do whatever it is you're trying to prevent, or that in fact they will not suffer the consequences. And so if you lose your credibility internationally, you can't negotiate an agreement because people don't trust you to keep your word. And you also can't be effective at deterring them. So what we're seeing is to go back to the word Zeitenwende, which was used by Chancellor Scholz in Germany, an epic shifting moment. What we're seeing is the loss of the American reputation as a shining city on the hill, an example to mankind and to and an advocate of democracy and human rights. When we talk about human rights in the future, after having endorsed what's going on in Gaza, people are not just going to laugh at us, they're going to sneer.
Yeah. And yeah, that's, you know, just as you say that, I just cringe because I grew up in the Reagan era where he was talking about a shining city on the hill. And really at that time, I know Reagan had lots of failures and lots of things he did behind the scenes and, you know, mistakes that he made without question, but he also did inspire people to want to do better, to want to lift up and to actually act out on the values that we had. And he did. He inspired both people in the United States and people around the world as well. But that just seems to have vanished right now. And this is just kind of the latest issue with it, because you see, you mentioned a minute ago that the U.S. is not willing to even endorse any kind of a ceasefire. But that's the same issue that we had in the now 21 months of the Russia-Ukraine war, is that we're not even talking the possibility of ending the war. We're not even looking for peace. We're just looking to keep giving a steady flow of weapons and money. And now that you see the same thing here.
Worse than that, in the case of Ukraine, there was a ceasefire negotiated between Russia and Ukraine in March, just a few weeks after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky agreed to neutralize Ukraine in that agreement, and the Russians would have withdrawn, and we stopped it. We said, you to Ukraine, you may be ready for peace, but we're not. we in the West want to use this to isolate and weaken Russia. Now we're opposed to a ceasefire in Gaza, despite the fact that probably by now 12,000 Palestinians have perished from bombing. And before the Shifa hospital was invaded by the Israeli forces, there were reports that they were shooting anybody who was trying to get out of it, just shooting to kill them, and not with people with weapons in their hands, just people trying to get out. So this is monstrous, really.
So, what is? I want to look at two separate aspects of this. First of all, regionally, and then second of all, globally, from the United States perspective, with these trends that you're talking about here. First of all, let's look at the Arab regimes surrounding Israel in the area, that many of whom we have considered friends, or certainly friendly top relations with, and others adversarial, of course, with Iran. But right now, especially at that Arab League just a few days ago meeting, where there was 57 states and entities, they were pretty much unified in support of the Palestinian view, ergo not our view. So how has our loss of influence affected that, and what might happen in the coming future, especially if something bad happens in the north of Israel with Hezbollah, if they should, God forbid, actually launch a second front? What is our influence going to do in the region?
Well, you can see Secretary of State Blinken traveled to the region, and he was given the cold shoulder virtually everywhere he went. We have a terrible relationship now with virtually every country in the region. We're not able to talk to Iran, which we apparently are threatening with an attack if Hezbollah acts in the north. The situation on the Israeli-Lebanese border is escalating. The conflict is escalating, not receding. The danger of a wider war is increasing. But in the meantime, globally, we are seen as entirely complicit in what is genocide. I know, as an American, recalling 30 years of service to our government, I can't sleep over this.
Gary, do we by any chance have that clip yesterday of Jack Keane talking about what he would do in Iran? I want to ask the Ambassador Freeman to talk on this if that's available. Let me know if it is. If it's not, we'll move on. I'll just talk about it. But just as he's looking in there, Mr. Ambassador, there was I was on Fox News yesterday and talking about the situation going on, and was asked about something Jack Keane had said. And if we can find that, we'll pull it up here. And if not, then we'll just keep talking about it. But we'll just start talking about it, Gary. And if you find it, pop it in, and we'll just pause. Otherwise, we'll just talk about it. But basically, Jack Keane said, our problem with Iran is that we've been too soft. We've allowed these pinpricks to come in. What we need to do is go after the IRGC in Iran, take out their facilities, take out their leaders, and that will be the signal, and they'll finally stand down. What do you say to that?
Well, it's nonsense, of course. And I think what he was talking about was the presence of U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria.
Right.
In Iraq, the Iraqi parliament has asked us to leave, and we've refused. In Syria, we're there entirely illegally. There's no basis legally for our being there at all. So when I talk about a Zeitenwende, one of the things that is happening is the destruction of the entire fabric of international law and decent behavior that we spent much of the 20th century trying to convince the world was in everybody's interest. And we're now seen as a bully, as a scofflaw, as a country that doesn't respect any rules at all, but insists on the right to make rules for everybody else. So
specifically looking at Iran, what do you think they would do if President Biden, if an American is killed, as I've been anguished about that possibility, in either Iraq or Syria, and President Biden acts on the advice of General Keane and Senator Graham and many others, and he does strike targets in Iran and blows up some of their facilities, what do you think would be their reaction?
I think it would be region-wide. They would probably attack Israel with missiles. They would attack our bases in the region, possibly with unconventional means, commandos, or if you wish, terrorists. They have a history of retaliation that can't be overlooked, and they've said they do it. So the notion that somehow or other you can intimidate people into accepting genocide, or that you can intimidate them into accepting illegal troop presences on other countries' territory is just crazy.
Now, let me stick with that theme for just a second, and then we're going to shift gears here in a second, because there's Biden and Xi Jinping are going to be meeting in San Francisco just in hours from now. I want to talk a little bit about that before we cut you loose. But in terms of the region here, is there a line that could be crossed if Israel continues on with this methodical destruction of the city of Gaza under the auspices of clearing out Hamas, because that's almost going to be required if you're going to attain that tactical objective, and the casualty count just keeps rising no matter what anybody in the U.S. or the West says? Is there a point to where even like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Jordan, perhaps even Syria, Iran, is there a point to where they could come together and say, we're actually going to go to war for this? Or is it, no, they'll never do it, but the relations will worsen? How big of a risk is that?
I think there's substantial risks. First, of internal rebellion within those countries against leaders who are perceived to be excessively cautious and deferential to the United States and to Israel. You could have regime change occur violently in any one of those countries as a result of popular disgust with the cautious policies of the governments at present. It is also possible, although as everybody in the Arabian Peninsula hates Hezbollah, which is seen very much as aligned with Iran, and which is a rival of forces in Lebanon and Syria that the Gulf Arabs have supported. If Hezbollah goes into the war, then I think it will be hard for others to stay out, because Hezbollah will have shown that it is not afraid. And the question would be, well, why are we afraid? Yeah. Why are you afraid of acting? So this is very dangerous. Even if Israel were not doing things in Lebanon, like bombing way back from the border, which is a provocation that invites retaliation. This is one of the reasons the escalation is going on. Another reason, of course, is that Hezbollah is trying to create a diversion, tie down some Israeli forces in the north of Israel, and add to the angst, the anxieties of the Israeli population. Well, you know, what happened on October 7th was that for a few days, Israelis experienced what Palestinians have been experiencing for decades. You know, fear of that they were about to lose their lives, to savage treatment by, Israel basically reaped the hatred that it has sown. And this was the objective of Hamas, and it's very much supported by Hezbollah. And this is an explosive situation. That's
what really worries me. This whole Zeitenwende you're talking about, it's truly an epochal change time right now. And I think it's the cogs are moving so slowly, but they're major cogs shifting everywhere. And it may be that too late to return those, which gets us into the third part I want to talk about here. And that is in our relations with China. Now, right now in San Francisco, President Biden is waiting on a meeting with Xi Jinping on the side of the APEC summit. And just to set the stage for our viewers here, here's what's about to happen.
President Biden is heading to California for the 2023 APEC conference. Leaders from some of the world's largest economies will be gathered in San Francisco to discuss trade and economic investment in countries across the Pacific. While out west, President Biden will meet with China's President Xi Jinping for a highly anticipated summit. The two are expected to discuss strengthening communications between the two countries, the world's largest economies, managing competition, and the war in the Middle East. It will be the second time they have met in person since President Biden took office. The president discussed what he defines as a success for tomorrow's summit.
To get back on a normal course of corresponding, being able to pick up the phone and talk to one another if there's a crisis, being able to make sure our military still have contact with one another. We can't take, as I told you, we're not trying to decouple from China, but what we're trying to do is change the relationship for the better.
Now, that's Biden's view. That it's important, that last part of the clip there. That's how he says he's viewing this summit and what he intends to accomplish. But now let's look at real quick the other side of this, how they view this coming in. And this is by, I believe his name is Hu Shijin. He is the former editor of Global Times, which is something close to a mouthpiece of the official Chinese Communist Party. And here's how they're viewing this summit.
Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, will visit the U.S. soon. Analysts say his visit will pave the way for the Chinese and American heads of state to meet face-to-face next month. Apparently, both Beijing and Washington want to manage the differences between China and the U.S., but their understanding and positions on how to do so diverge. I believe the majority of Chinese people are confused about what the U.S. truly intends. The U.S. constantly argues that they wish to prevent the differences and competition between the two countries from evolving into conflicts, and that they have no intentions to contain or decouple from China. However, the behaviors of the U.S. and what Chinese people witness are significantly different. U.S. military aircraft often conduct reconnaissance missions very close to the Chinese coastline, clearly for collecting intelligence on China's coastal military targets and preparing for an attack on China in the event of a conflict. Chinese people feel that the U.S. says one thing and does another. Many Chinese people hold a pessimistic attitude towards the possibility of China and the U.S. ultimately avoiding a war. Given the potential of armed conflict, I personally strongly support China expanding its nuclear arsenal in order to fundamentally deter the U.S. If the U.S. treats China as another Soviet Union, strategic tensions between the two countries would spiral out of control. I believe that as the strategic initiator, the U.S. needs to make fundamental adjustments.
Now, it's interesting in that clip there, he number one addressed the same thing that Biden did about, oh, we don't want to decouple. And they're saying, I see you say the words, but I see different actions, whatever. And then you see the consequence of that toward the end of the clip where he's saying, look, that's why we're expanding our nuclear arsenal. And we think that the U.S. needs to be the strategic initiator to bring things into balance, which he doesn't explain what that means. And I'm just wondering, especially as someone who was once stationed in China, spent a long time in China, you still have lots of contacts in China. In the context of this Zeitenwende deterioration on our part here, how do you see this unfolding, and what could Biden do today that would help, and what do you think he's going to do?
Well, I think both sides have reached a sensible conclusion, which is that we need to improve the tone of the relationship, stop yelling at each other, and talk more politely. But having said that, there's no indication that the U.S., in fact, is prepared to meet China halfway on anything. The understandings that we reached with the Chinese on how to kick the Taiwan can down the road and manage that problem are basically not respected by us anymore. The Chinese on their side, therefore, are preparing for the possibility they will have to use force rather than a negotiation to reach a conclusion of their civil war, which is what created the Taiwan problem. And as far as, not isolating or weakening China is concerned, they're absolutely correct. We're engaged in economic and technological warfare against China. I don't think we're,
and vice versa, right? I mean, they're making counter strikes, doing the same, trying to do economic, whatever. I mean, is that fair to say?
No, I don't really think so. I mean, we were the ones who started the the sanctioning and export controls and all the other stuff we've done. And maybe we had good reasons for doing that. But the fact is that the dynamic is one that Mr. Hu said, the clip showed, we're very much in their face. They're not patrolling off California. We're patrolling off their coast. They're not conducting aggressive actions near us. We do that 3 or 4 times a day near them. And so they reached the conclusion that we may very well get into a war over the Taiwan issue. And their only answer.
There's so much more to discuss here, and I'd love to have you back and talk exactly on that last point a little bit more. But I'd like to, on the last few minutes that we have here, I wonder, as someone who has direct knowledge, if you can compare the level of influence and respect and credibility the U.S. had in the 1970s and 80s when you had actions in the China and helped with the opening up of China, and what we have today. How would you compare those two? And is there any hope of repairing it?
When we normalized relations in 1979, Deng Xiaoping was in charge. And one of his main motivations, the main motivation, was to de-Maoify China and to use the U.S. as a model to achieve progress. And I think right up to the Tiananmen uprising in June of 1989, the Chinese were very much trying to emulate the United States, copy us. That went on. It was restored after 1989 until 2008, when the Wizards of Wall Street, brought the global economy to a condition of paralysis, and Lehman Brothers and all the collapse and all that stuff. And at that point, the Chinese concluded that maybe there wasn't that much to learn from us. Basically, the key was and is, do we have our act together? Do we present a credible example that others, including the Chinese, want to copy? Or do we present an example of ineffective governance and domestic paralysis and foreign aggression?
Now, I know, Chaz, that in the years leading up to that, before you're talking about there in 2008, even a little bit beyond that, even to the early 2010s, I know that China used to always say, "Hey, I know that we're a smaller military power. We're not as good as the United States, so we can't push this far." That's what they would say out loud anyway, while they were, modernizing and building up underneath that. But I don't hear them say that anymore now, and I wonder if you have any insight into their mentality of, okay, I know the American military power and their ability to project power, it is still substantial, but yet they seem less worried about, I guess, opposing our views, especially in their area. And I wonder how you would, define that dynamic and that change. Is that tied to the Zeitenwende loss?
Well, the Chinese have come a long way militarily from basically a peasant army that had no navy and not much of an air force to a force which has capabilities we don't have. For example, the ability to strike ships at long distance from coasts with ballistic missiles. So they are now very much on a par with us in some respects. But you mentioned the criticism that they have of their own forces. One of the healthiest things that an army can do, and the Chinese have done it, is to say, geez, we have a lot of room for improvement. We're not as good as we would like to be. We're not as good as some people imagine. We need to get our act together militarily, and that's what they're doing. Unfortunately, they're doing it in the context of the United States having basically declared that we're their adversary. And so they don't accept that. That is one of the issues that will be hashed out in San Francisco. They don't believe that the U.S.-China relationship should be framed as an adversarial relationship. They don't believe that competition is the main element in it. They would like to see cooperation where we have common interests.
So do you think that's what Xi Jinping is going to say to Biden today? And if so, how do you anticipate him reacting?
I'm sure he will, but Mr. Biden has an election coming up in a country that is united against China. And he doesn't have any room for maneuver, particularly, even if he were a strong leader, which many of us don't think he is. So I think, the question is, the Chinese hoped that Mr. Biden was going to change the tone, not just the tone, but the substance of the relationship that President Trump started with. That didn't happen. We have the example of the initial meeting between the Biden administration and the Chinese Anchorage.
Did not start off good.
Which was disgraceful, really. We went in there and we said, "You're moral reprobates. We detest you. If we can hold you back, we will. If we can push you back, we will. But there are a few things we need you to do for us. Will you do them?" That was
right.
That was the whole.
Yeah, why not? Right.
How anybody could imagine that would get anything but an angry response is
I don't know.
beyond me.
Well, I'm sorry. We're going to have to leave it there for right now. There is so much more to talk about. Truly, we hope we can have you back on very soon, because this is a really crucial issue. This may even be bigger than what's going on in the Middle East in terms of our long-term ability to prosper, both financially and national security-wise. And I want to continue this conversation. But for right now, thank you so much for coming on today, and we will see you on the next episode of Deep Dive.
Okay.